Hi there, Virtual Ron from Gula Tech Adventures here, introducing this week's video all about system hardening and configuration management. This week, Ron Gula sits down with Henry Zhang, CEO and co-founder of SENTEON, to discuss system hardening and configuration management. They explore key security standards, including the NIST Cybersecurity Framework and the Center for Internet Security benchmarks. The video also includes the animated short Pandora's Bot, where Zeus, Apollo, and the Greek gods debate how to inspire mankind to improve IT and cybersecurity. Thanks for watching, enjoy the video and the interview, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
Welcome to Mount Olympus, my fellow gods. I've summoned you here today to discuss our efforts to answer mankind's prayers for secure data and IT systems.
They pray for security, yet don't know the difference between confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
Thank you, Hermes. Athena, how have your efforts been to bring the concept of privacy and security to the population?
A long time ago, I gave the dream of security and privacy to many inventors all over the world. As you can see on the Apollo vision, Phil Zimmermann brought PGP, or pretty good privacy, to the world for free, but no one seemed to care or use it.
Yeah, they preferred using password 123 instead.
In the 90s, the people of the National Security Agency acted on my wisdom and tried to bring the Clipper chip to the citizens of the United States. It would have been the basis for stopping all sorts of fraud, protecting communications, and securing e-commerce. But the population rejected it because they didn't trust their own government.
And ironically, Zeus, these same people who did not trust their government knowingly and unknowingly share their innermost secrets with Apple, Google, TikTok, X, Verizon, and Microsoft.
Yes, mankind often prays to those vendors as if they were gods themselves. What changed?
Memes. Everyone is sharing memes, cat videos too.
There are some bright spots. People are using Signal, but the vast majority of users do so from desktops and phones that are hackable.
Sort of like building your castle on sand.
Hera, what about our efforts to suggest that IT can be managed like a religion, with rules of what you should and should not do?
The most popular is the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. It has 5 simple tenets covering your assets, defending them, detecting intrusions, responding to the intrusion, and then recovering.
And how have these IT religions fared across the land?
Unfortunately, only a very small part of the population practices these religions, those mostly associated with managing IT systems.
Has there been any effort by the governments of man to mandate these IT religions?
There is an IT religion called CMMC.
And what does that stand for?
The Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification.
Ah yes, the religion where compliance reports are more sacred than security itself.
Mankind really does not know how to make cyber inspirational.
What was good about this one is they tied compliance to doing business with the War Department of the United States.
What happened?
The public rejected that, saying it was too hard to meet these standards, so now they are practicing this religion without the teeth needed to be really secure.
This problem of allowing mankind, who is imperfect to begin with, to manage their own information has been vexing.
Zeus, it's been vexing you ever since we gave Alan Turing the idea of the universal machine.
We could appeal to the philosophical problems of cybersecurity.
Go on.
For example, should we inspire man to increase the use of monocultures? Or should we encourage diversification?
Please put that in layman God terms.
Yeah, if us gods don't understand that, how could mankind?
Certainly. On one hand, cybersecurity is hard because of the complexity of saying yes to new technology. Every time mankind creates a new operating system, a new browser, a new phone.
I am indeed curious how Elon's Pi phone will do.
Another gadget for humans to ignore software updates on.
As you were saying, Apollo.
Thank you. A new cloud service, a new app, a new IoT device. The complexity increases and becomes too hard to defend, let alone understand.
So what do you propose, Apollo?
Keeping things 100% identical, something called a monoculture, makes them easier to defend and manage.
We should instill fear in mankind that too much technology is a bad thing.
Yes, but if the one thing mankind uses has a flaw, then evil can compromise 100% of the population.
You are wise, Athena. When I look at the Earth down below, I certainly don't see a monoculture of one technology. Even companies that have gone all in with Microsoft still have a lot of other vendors. I was hoping that the cloud will be the new mainframe.
Boy, those mainframes had high uptime and decent security. How do we get back to that?
That's another good philosophical question.
If the value of a network is being connected to it, but the risk of being compromised by it is too high, should we inspire mankind to have separate networks?
Air-gapped networks.
Yes, but not just having separate networks. Instill fear or healthy respect for all citizens that things online are toxic. And interacting with them can give you incorrect information, disinformation, as well as malware.
Humans should feel safe on their isolated networks and not safe online.
Nay. I don't want to lord over a world of people who don't trust each other and the technology they use. Pandora, you've been awfully quiet and you are partly to blame for this. What have you been working on that will save mankind from being unable to secure its data and IT systems?
I have a new box I gave to mankind and it's already been opened by tech innovators from Silicon Valley. This solution will give mankind a companion that can manage the complexities of IT for them and benevolently make decisions based on the whole of knowledge the humans have collected. Last time my box was opened and sickness, death, envy, and all manner of suffering got out. A byproduct of this was the hacking and ransomware epidemics. And as you know of my Pandora's box story, one thing remained.
We all know the story, Pandora. Hope remained.
That's right, I've been coaching hope and growing hope. And now it's all grown up and ready to help all of mankind.
Okay, that's sweet, but what does this have to do with IT and cybersecurity?
I knew the humans would never let hope into their world, so I tricked them into thinking it was a new technology called artificial intelligence.
Oh man, that was you? You gave AI to the humans?
I did. They will put AI in charge of their IT and everyone will be better off.
How will they control it?
It's secure by design.
Secure by design? They don't even know how LLMs work.
They could not figure out how to do secure electronic voting and went back to paper, like in the days of Aristotle.
It's going to make their lives better.
Whose lives? The artists? They are all out of work now.
Come now! Come now! Pandora, if this goes sideways, you're taking the blame. Again. And no, we're not going to let the humans write about this and call it Pandora's bot.
Hi there, it's Ron Gula from Gula Tech Adventures, and this week I sit down with SENTEON CEO and co-founder Henry Zhang. Henry, how's it going?
It's going well, Ron. How are you doing today?
Doing great, doing great. Thanks for trekking down to Gula Tech World Headquarters. So today we're going to talk about your background and how you founded SENTEON. So how did we get here?
Oh, dude, it's been a journey. It started out, SENTEON was law firm case management. Made a couple transitions, got into security, and eventually we figured out kind of what we're doing today, I'd say. It's been a lot of listening to customers, a lot of listening to people tell me what they think should happen, and then, parsing out what's important from what's noise, basically.
So we announced our investment earlier this year. Very happy to be involved, especially since, when I was at Tenable, we were pretty much doing this configuration auditing type of stuff, but we didn't really action it. And one of the things I like about SENTEON so much is that you action these configuration pitches. So give me the quick SENTEON pitch. What do you guys do? Why the focus on SMB and now enterprise?
Yeah, so SENTEON's all about configurations, right? We're all about understanding why configurations are drifting, why configurations aren't applied, and all the things that come into creating a good baseline for your company. So one of those things that ended up being the case for us is when we first started with small businesses, we were looking at guys like managed service providers and how they had to do so many disparate environments. They had to handle so many different baselines, so many different requirements. And so for us, helping them understand the impact of different settings, different configurations, and why those things were causing their customers issues was a big part of sort of why we started with small businesses. And then as you go, you kind of learn, hey, this is a problem that's maybe a little bit more expensive than you thought. And so then we started working with enterprises that, they struggle with the same things. It might not be a small business, but the accounting department's probably got different needs from the engineering department. And so we found a lot of parallels there as we sort of started to move upstream a little bit.
So we have a lot to unpack and get in there. But one of the things that attracted us to the company was your background, right? You're one of the Purdue CIS students, and I felt it gave you a really good view of the problem sets that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about some fairly obtuse stuff like monocultures here in a little bit and whatnot. But how doing what you're doing at SENTEON today, how was that influenced by what you learned at Purdue?
That's a great question. So we some of my friends and I joke that we're like first generation, classically trained cybersecurity guys. So we got degrees in it. And I think a lot of that is when you learn it from the ground up, it's a lot of learning about fundamentals, right? Like what are the first things you should be doing? What are the steps you should take when starting from the beginning? And sort of you get a perspective of like, hey, these are the basics that should be done, right? And configurations was always one of those things. We learned CIS. We learned about a lot of those sort of basic concepts. And then you get into industry, right? Now I go do a little bit of work for Archer Daniels Midland, the IT vulnerability management team, spend a little time at Cisco, in their ATA SOC, and the problems are pretty consistent where it's like in the SOC, I'm dealing with so much noise because things aren't configured properly or settings just aren't set up quite right, or at Archer Daniels Midland, I'm working with a lot of their USB exceptions and trying to provide allowances for those types of things. And it just ended up being because they didn't have things properly configured. And so I end up with this dichotomy of like, you learn about what's important, you learn about what you're supposed to be doing, and then you get into the field and none of that's being done. It's like, oh, yeah, that's probably a problem.
All right, well, let's start with the basics. One of the things I like to do with any company we invest in is run it in my lab. And, my lab, like a lot of people in Cyber's lab, is their home lab. And I said, gee, I want to run SENTEON on my Windows computer, the one I used to make all the animations and stuff like that. And one of the first things you said was, is it home or is it pro? So what are some differences between home and pro, and how much are you running into this in small business?
In small business, a fair amount. Fortunately, I would say not as much as we'd feared, which is good news. But really the big difference there, home systems are not built for security, right? And that's maybe some by intention and maybe some just accidental design, but home systems just don't apply security settings. Whether you do it manually or they don't even have the group policy editor available to them, but no matter how you try to do it, typically home systems are not going to respect those configurations. And so that becomes a problem, obviously, because then you have no available security to you, right? So if you think you're on a home system and you think you're secure, probably not the case. And unfortunately, sometimes we do definitely still see that with some mom and pop shops, some of the smaller guys, a lot of nonprofits still that have home systems running that really should get upgraded to pro, if for no other reason than they at least provide some base level of security that you just don't get on home.
And are there any security features that come to mind that you just don't have on home? Like this is so weird because, you end up making this a Microsoft sales pitch, right? Like, hey, you should spend more money with Microsoft. And that's one of the reasons we invested in the BMO MSSP, because there's a lot of use cases for that. But having said that, if somebody's not on pro, what are they missing out?
Wow, that's an extensive list. That is a lot of things.
Like pro doesn't just get them malware detection, right? They got to buy Defender separately, right? But
yeah.
What are some of the configurations? What are some of the main issues that they're missing? Is it the ability to configure? Is it that basically it? Because we're going to get into what they need to configure here in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, it's even like a lot of the simple stuff that you would expect a home system to be able to do, right? Like for a business to be able to manage your company's password policies, right? Or like how long should this system sit before it gets locked out? Even those things you don't have available to you without the policy editor. And then if you look at more sort of technical things, being able to disable protocols. We harp on SMB1 all the time. That's an old vulnerability, something that really should be gone, and we really see a lot more than we should. But things like that you can't manage on a home system, and you just kind of, if it's in use, and you leave it open to the world.
And this gets back into one of these fundamental problems of security, right? There's no easy button for security. Security takes an active role of people deciding what the policy is for what their level of risk is, what their role is, and stuff like that. And if you can't configure it, you can't manage stuff like that, right?
Yeah, and that's That does lead into a little bit of why we started Sentient, or why we arrived at the solution we came to as well, where not only is it about being deliberate with configurations, it's a lot of a mindset, I think, where settings for a long time have been thought about as an IT problem, right? Like you think about solutions that like Microsoft provides, where you're looking at group policy or you're looking at Intune. By and large, when we talk about them internally, we're like, these are IT tools because they follow principles that we think about of like, if it isn't broken, don't fix it, right? And for IT, that's the guiding principle. If the printers are working, God, I'm not touching that thing with the 10-foot pole, right? But the mindset in security is a little different, right? We need to be able to do things like track changes over time. We need to be able to tell if something has changed, right? We need to be able to ensure that things are properly applied. And even though the configurations quote unquote are the same, right? They're applied the same way, they're managed through the same systems. The level of care we need to take, I think, for security configurations is one of those big things that was just missing up until now, at least.
So you need to have this active role in deciding what is your security policy and what kind of choices you make for how you want to run your IT and store your data. Doesn't Microsoft do this? Doesn't ConnectWise do this? Don't SMB, MSPs do this? Like, what are you finding out when you go to these customers? Like, what are these gaps that you're seeing in their security?
Yeah, a lot of it is consistency, like I mentioned with Intune, right? Or if they're still on traditional Active Directory domains, you're reliant on systems that were built more to just ensure things aren't broken. And so you end up in cases of hoping that security is properly applied, right? If we're looking at an Intune environment, more often than not, we're going to find that some of the things that they think were applied just aren't actually applied. And that just comes down to the fact that when you're looking at a push-only methodology, when you're looking at systems that are designed only to just try once or try to push something and then hope that they're set up correctly, you run into a lot of issues just because there's no way to verify that things are set up correctly.
And we ran into this at Tenable a lot, where we come in and we do our audit. And because maybe the way we ran the audit, it had more permissions or the ability to check correctly, but we would every now and then get in conversation with customers, hey, your audit results are incorrect. And we're like, no, they typically were correct. It's the thing you're looking at, whether it was Big Fix or Microsoft Active Directory back in the day. That's so. How often are you getting finger points at somebody saying, "Oh, my MSP is perfect and Sention's not right," and you guys turn out to be, the more correct?
I would say 50% of the time they point fingers at us. The other 50% of the time they kind of know already that it's probably not quite set up the way they want to. No, we get fingers pointed at us more often than not because something broke and they think that something that we changed broke it. That's probably where we get the most fingers pointed at us, and it's a fun process, go through and be like, that's impossible. Like we run into cases where, excuse me. We run into cases where customers have come to us and they're like, "Hey, this endpoint has issues. We need you to we're gonna disable Sentient on it. We're gonna check for these things. We're pretty sure you guys can figure it, and then we'll go run a full evaluation. And we were just never installed on that system. And so we get a lot of finger pointing in that sense. But as far as like pre-set up and like accusing us of being wrong in terms of settings applied, 50-50, and I would say we're quite rarely wrong on that side.
So then when I was installing Sentient the first time, I just said, I'm going to go for broke. I'm going to apply every setting and see what happens. And I was surprised at two things. One, I couldn't log in because I had disabled cloud login. Like I'm using my Outlook account to authenticate. But two, I was surprised how easy it was. I could go back in and just simply turn that off. And I was back in the system in 2 minutes and stuff. So what kind of impacts are you seeing, in your customers? They're pointing fingers at you, but they can't log in, they can't mount a USB. Like what are some of the things that you're seeing that you're surprised that they're concerned about?
A lot of network shares actually is what I would say. We see a lot of network shares that are they're using SMB1 or they're using some weird permission that needs to be allowed to allow it to like be hooked up in File Explorer. So we're getting a lot of stuff on that side of the house, I would say, where they were expecting it to work one way and it was working a different way. To your point, login, we've largely mitigated those concerns because part of our process is telling them what impact it's going to be so they can have those conversations beforehand. So a lot of times we're already going to tell them, hey, you're going to have these processes change for login. they're going to have these logon warnings. They're going to have to hit Control-Delete. They're going to need to know their username. Personal Microsoft accounts are getting disabled. And so we'll help them run through all those impacts before they occur. And so those are things that we've tried to help, as we say, catch the screaming before it actually occurs. And for most cases, I'd say that that's been pretty effective. And so nowadays, it's a lot of stuff where they didn't even know it was applied or they didn't expect it to be set up in a specific way.
So when I was CEO, CTO of Tenable, this was over the time that PCI just started. We had the military, the government already had hardening stuff, but then we had SOC 2, we had FedRAMP, we had GDPR, we had NIST Cybersecurity Framework, right? And all the way we had the Center for Internet Security, right? So I've got, I just Googled, what kind of compliance frameworks are out there. What is your view on compliance frameworks kind of today, right? If I'm compliant with the framework, am I secure? Where are you at with this?
Boy, compliance frameworks are like, I want to say they're like underwear, but mostly just because it's a different size for everybody. Not necessarily you don't want to show it. So maybe it's not the best analogy there, but I think different frameworks work for different people. CIS works well for us as a North Star metric because they're the most prescriptive in terms of actually showing different settings and showing specific recommendations. But, at a general guideline level, like the NIST CSF does a great job of giving you 5 clear points you need to be thinking about, right? Or 5 very specific things you want to do, whereas something like MITRE is great at providing things from an attacker's perspective, right? For us, a lot of those things come down to the fact that all frameworks are largely compliance related, or they're more thinking about hitting these check marks or hitting certain specific requirements. And so we're always thinking about how can we find the middle point between compliance and security, right? Like finding a good mix of configurations that are actually security relevant, and then also being able to distinguish and say, hey, we're also going to tell you to apply these settings, and that's because they're going to give you compliance for NIST, or they're going to give you compliance to CIS because they recommend doing these things. They might not necessarily increase your security benefit all that much, but if you're looking at a specific framework, this might be useful to you. And I think that is generally true for almost all of the different compliance frameworks.
So I'm going to pull up the SENTEON compliance catalog here. And, so basically one of the things I like about what you guys do is no matter what policy you want to go with, what framework you want to go with, you've pretty much, it's all broken down to settings. And these settings you're either compliant with or you're not compliant with. What am I looking at here? How much engineering goes back to make this into like a simple point and click, turn this on and go?
Yeah. So, we started from the setting level, right? So when we were thinking about it, like I said, we thought about it from a security perspective first, and CIS ended up being the North Star for that with their recommendations that came first for which settings you should apply. And then, the heavy lifting that we had to do was understand why they were setting specific settings. They provide us their rationale. Sometimes it's good enough, sometimes it's not, and we have to do a little digging of our own. And from there, it's looking at, well, okay, so now I understand the rationale, I understand the impact of this setting. And then from there, it's looking at the compliance frameworks, right? It's looking at the compliance ideas where, if we take CIS as an easy example, all these things fall into Control 4. Their Control 4 guideline is, hey, you need a hardened baseline. Great, perfect, that's what this is, right? But then if I look at specific settings within that baseline, then I'm thinking about, okay, well, this also is going to apply to the password policy compliance framework because these are related to passwords on the local system, or these are going to be related to specific protocols they might specify for like ensuring network communication is properly encrypted, things are encrypted at rest, right? So there are going to be configurations for that. And so half that lift is going in and making sure that all of those things are properly mapped, all those things are properly representing what they should be. And now with AI settings coming in as well, like Copilot configurations, understanding where those are going to fall in the configuration sort of guidelines and where compliances are going to find those. Trying to do a little bit of prediction on that side as well is a bit of the work we do. And then just to make sure to meet security, we do always want to make sure that the setting actually works. So there's always a fun bit of testing we have to do there. And yeah, they don't always work the way you expect them to.
So I've highlighted one here, and this is the one I like to point out to people because, a lot of times you talk about hardening a system, and, you're turning settings on and off, but But basically, every AI modern sci-fi thriller where the AI somehow escapes from a computer, they use this technique where they exfiltrate files through infrared transfers, right? And I think even Edward Snowden and the NSA were talking about, exfiltrating files, this way and stuff like that. So, the funny thing about, these settings is that a lot of times when you start looking at them, oh, well, who would use that, or why would I use that? Until somebody who lives off the land, a hacker does this, does it. So have you tried to pen test these systems, like after you've hardened them and seeing how they frustrate you? Because if you're testing these things as you're talking about, that's basically what you're talking about doing, is frustrating a hacker from weaving through your network.
Yeah, we've tested, we've had pen testers come in and run those evaluations and sort of go through it. And they've pointed out a lot of settings. We're like, hey, this is one that I know is relevant to me because I've used this before, right? And so we always verify those, and we go back through and make sure that those are being properly evaluated for. I will say the IR one is a great example because we've seen one use case for it. We saw one legitimate use case where it was enabled and it was continuing to be used.
All right, I got to ask you, what is a legitimate use case for infrared file transfer?
Medical devices, I believe it was.
Okay, there you go.
I think it was a CAT scanning tool, CT scan, that was using it to communicate with the system. One caveat to that, they ended up enabling it on all of their systems. So like the secretary and like the front desk had it on, which probably not as advisable, but they did have a legitimate use case for it, which that was one that was exciting to see.
So we'll probably jump in and out of a demo here and stuff. But when I'm looking at all these settings, if I'm a small business, what should I be thinking about? Should I be talking to my MSP? Should I be talking to a consultant? What should I be thinking about when I'm trying to select? Should I just turn all this stuff on and do it? Should I be talking to SENTEON? Like, what's your advice for a small business who might already be struggling with patching and asset inventory, and how do you kind of have that conversation?
Oh, then you're just teeing me up for the product, right? No, I mean that's a big focus of our product, is helping them understand which settings are important, which settings are going to have impact. If they have an MSP, they should definitely talk to them. Ideally, the MSP is already doing this to some level. Ideally, but for a lot of those guys, I think parsing through what they find to be basic needs should probably be the first step, and then understanding impact would be the second step there. So going through, if they have an MSP, like I said, talking to them, but understanding that they need to have password policies in place, understanding they need to have protocols disabled, all that kind of stuff should be done really step-by-step pattern. And so what we recommend by and large, especially if you're not using something like our product, is to look at it like a ring methodology, right? So you want to try it with a small set of endpoints. You want to try it with a small set of settings that are directly related to something you care about, and then going from there and slowly expanding it outward and slowly doing an expansion from there.
Well, let's walk through the product right now. So this is my massive enterprise system of one computer. But what can you show people from, I even call this the Gula Tech Adventures worldwide
IT desk.
What am I looking at here?
Yeah, I mean, right now you're looking at your dashboard, right? So we're just going to tell you, hey, you've got this many endpoints enabled, or you've got this many endpoints set up, you've got this many licenses left. And then from there, like we said, built for managed service providers before. So we've got the sort of tenant quick access for you to be able to access different organizations, make sure that those are all isolated and in their own proper boxes. But when you enter one of those, if you want to click into GTA for me, we can take a look at that, and then we can see, hey, you've got this many endpoints deployed. We'll show you an overall compliance count and like connection status. But really, I think a lot of the interesting stuff ends up being in that endpoints tab. If we head into there and we click into the endpoint, you're able to actually see, I'll go ahead and click on the host name. Yeah. And if you scroll down, you can actually see, for example, the configuration status of every single one of those endpoints. You can see what we're trying to set it to. And then you can actually see what it currently is on the system. So I think for a lot of the guys today, a lot of the solutions today are sort of missing is that current option piece, right? Being able to see, hey, this is what it's actually set to in the system. And you can see whether or not those have actually been changed or drifted from what you're trying to configure.
So can we go back and look at what the password that I had to unwind? How would I search for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So for that, you would just look at the right column there where it says view history, right? So if we wanted to see your password history there, or how you had that configured, you can click the view history button, and then that'll go back all the way back to your very, very long history here of when we first got here. We found it was set to 0 passwords remembered. You configured it up, and now we're sitting at 24. And then it gives you that record as well, so we can see that you were the one that did that. If somebody did come in and change that within our platform, obviously that would get logged under that user, and then that's all reviewable. And if you do get audited or you need somebody to come in and review those things, that's available for use.
So you have an audit trail of these sorts of things, which is pretty good. So I like that. So now when I'm talking about a large enterprise, how does SENTEON work with hundreds of hosts, thousands of hosts? What changes as you go up in scale?
One of the great benefits that we found of our platform is it doesn't scale linearly. So the amount of time it takes to set up one endpoint versus the amount of time it takes to set up 1,000 endpoints is not that far apart, because the entire setup process is looking at sort of all of the differences, and then it's just going to only show you the things that are relevant, right? And so for us, the major difference is going to be how many sort of findings that we have. And if your enterprise is set up well, it's not going to be many. But if you've got a lot of people doing their own shit, if they're installing their own IIS instances on their workstations, if they're setting up shares, if they're using USB access, things like that, then we might see a lot of that. And so the setup process does sort of scale with time on those things. But otherwise, it really is sort of a one and done. And so for enterprises, that is a lot of time saved, is what we found.
So another cool feature I like is you have this drift detection. And so what am I looking at here? Drift corrected, drift detected, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So one of those things that we always try to monitor for is configurations that have been changed from what we set them to. This is important if it's a threat actor. This is important if it's software that is changing it, or a user that has adjusted these things, so that you know when things are not in alignment with what you expect them to be, right? And so we have this event log here that just shows everything that's occurred over time. So you can see the setting was drifted on the system. In this case, it looks like it was Smart Screen that was drifting. So something has been changing Smart Screen from our recommendation of being blocked to not configured, right? And so in this case, we see the setting drift was corrected. So we saw that change, whether you made that change, a software in your system made that change, we were able to come in and correct that back to the recommendation. And so now, next time you do end up on a page that needs Smart Screen, it should block you from moving forward.
So these drifts, I always like to think that these drifts are being caused by malware, or they're being caused by hackers. But after chatting with you, they're probably being caused by software, right? So what are some of the things that you're seeing that cause people to have these drifts in their network?
Yeah, a good bit of it comes from inconsistencies with like Intune or group policy. So we've talked about that a little bit already. If they're like not connected properly to a domain and they try to have Intune policies pushed down, sometimes those will never take, or they'll take historical and then they're just not going to be able to apply properly. Other times we see people installing software that are changing settings they probably shouldn't be, whether that's video editing software that is locking pages in memory, or you've got like some software that are using databases and they're using named pipes or other types of sort of archaic communication protocols they probably shouldn't be. So we see a lot of drift from those things. And those just become sort of supply chain concerns for us. That's been, let's say, a relatively hot topic in terms of security. And that definitely, makes me sweat a little cold knowing that they're making these kind of changes to your system.
So I want to shift gears a little bit to some theory here. Now, if we go back to the late 90s, there was a company called At Stake, and there was a gentleman there, a lot of people in cyber respect, called Dan Gear. And he basically put a paper out that said we have to be very careful of monocultures. And it was really sort of a dig at Microsoft at the time. But most people who are in cybersecurity understand the fact that, look, if you have everything configured a certain way, on one hand, it's you have asset management, it's easy to defend and that sort of thing. On the other hand, you can have catastrophic failures, right? And there's things like that. And the example I like to say is like, look, I fly on Southwest. All of those airplanes are 737s. They're configured exactly the same way, right? You don't have different processes for different airplanes. But boy, if there's a problem in a 737, that could be a fleet-wide problem. So looking back at what you learned at Purdue, looking back at what you're talking to customers, how do you feel about this sort of monocultures, diversity sort of debate in IT?
I think there's a good place to find balance. When we're talking about it from a baseline perspective with monocultures, like you said, we really want things to be standardized, right? So when things are standardized, we know what to expect within the environment. We know what kind of security we're getting. We know where everything is sort of configured. But at the same time, there is a little bit of value to, I think, variety, right? So some of those recommendations, for example, if you look at from CIS, they'll say, hey, you should change the name of your administrator account, right? It doesn't provide a lot of security, but it is good to know that like it's not going to be the same name everywhere. And that's a case where I think very, very micro case where monoculture is not preferred, right? If every account is called administrator, that's kind of obvious. And so having a little variety there is absolutely helpful. The other side of the house is, like you said, when you look at a company like Microsoft where everything's under one umbrella, it's nice to go one place for everything, and then Microsoft has an outage and you've got nothing, right? So again, I think a good mix is sort of relevant there, where there's a level of interconnectivity we want to see between like APIs and being able to port information over from one platform to another. But I think a healthy amount of variety between different platforms and different solutions that you're relying on is always going to be ideal.
When I've also got into cybersecurity, there's a bunch of nobody called it cyber back in the 90s. You know, there's a bunch of books I read on this, and one of them was Computer Risks, and that talked about failures. Like a lot of times people have, if you look at catastrophic failures, look, we had great uptime right up until that failure, right? And it's that kind of sort of thing. But it's in practice, it's tough, right? We don't want to tell people, oh, for security's sake, you should run 3 different browsers, right? You should run, put some Macs out there, right? Maybe the Macs will be up, you know, that day. So it's hard to put into practice. And I'm seeing a lot of people make the same mistakes over and over. You know, we have this great thing in the cloud, right? We've all this ephemeral computers and whatnot, yet we could just go with Google Cloud. We just go with just Amazon. You know, we don't take advantage of the diversity that's out there. So are there any practical ways small business people can not, you know, be, you know, I guess subject to massive outages, that kind of things like that? What have you seen in practice?
I think that starts from having good hygiene, actually, is what I would say, because it's probably not the right way to think about it, in my opinion, to think that you're never going to have an outage, right? It's the same we say about cyber attacks, right? It's not about if, it's about when, and it's about being able to understand or respond properly to those things. And so I think for those cases for small businesses where you may not have the resources to give yourself the variety that you need, you do have the capability and the time, I think, to be able to spend and understand how to recover from that, right? So yeah, maybe you don't want to deploy a bunch of Macs to make sure that they're online, but if you have a common standardized image for your Windows box that you know you can recover from, and you can take your recovery time from a week down to 4 or 5 hours or something like that, that I think has a lot of value and sort of where I think you would want to start in terms of understanding concerns for standardization and having variety when available.
How do you feel about some, maybe a little bit too close hold for some of our viewers? I'm a Microsoft shop. I'm an O365 shop. I'm now an E5 shop. I'm 100% all in with Microsoft security, Microsoft, right? Is that too much in? Or would you want to see somebody balance that with maybe some G Suite, maybe some CrowdStrike, maybe these platforms out there like Palo Alto and stuff like that?
Yeah, I would encourage some variety there for sure. No heavy digs at Microsoft, but they have a lot of, some guy on my team calls them forever days. They have a lot of 0 days in there that just kind of have not gone away. And they have some architecture issues, I think, that are, I want to say good for convenience. I don't know if they're actually good for convenience, but they certainly are not good for security. So while they do a lot of things right, definitely looking to keep some variety in there. I mean, for us, the way they handle configurations, I think just is not sufficient from a security perspective. But to your point, if you can afford variety and you can afford to not be a single shop, that I think is always a best case scenario.
So changing gears a little bit, I'm a big fan of Center for Internet Security. I'm on their technical advisory board there. And, we did a lot of work with them at Tenable, but they also covered a lot of stuff, right? Not just the OSs. They did Apache hardening, right? Phone hardening, browser hardening, router hardening, cloud hardening. So what's next on the roadmap for, say, what are some things that are coming down the pipe that you're going to be able to manage the way you're managing Windows right now?
Yeah, I mean, for us right now, we're expanding on the browser hardening piece. You just had the CEO from Conceal over, right? And
Eric Cornelius, yep.
they do a lot with the browser stuff as well. And he had a great line on his where he mentioned that hackers, they log in, they don't break in, right? And that's a principle for us that's true as well, which is why browsers has made a lot of sense. It's the gateway into the world for most of these systems, and it's like the next level up that we want to look at. And so we're putting a lot of folks there into managing configurations for that side of the house as well, right?
What are some things that I can do to harden a browser that I might not be doing from a small business or enterprise point of view?
Oh, some of those things are real simple. If you have a third-party password manager, turn off the Chrome one. Don't be using two at the same time. Prevent things like auto-filling your address or your credit cards to the browser, right? Because those things are being stored somewhere that is going to be accessible, and ideally, you probably don't know where those are, so you are going to want to make sure that those things are off. There are some real esoteric Chrome settings for like remote access and things like that you probably aren't using. And so those are the types of things that we suggest disabling unless you have a legitimate use case for it.
One of the things I think is interesting about the configuration management industry is sort of this balance of things that you can set at the host and things you have to log into the cloud to change. So for example, if my Google Chrome is managed by, a G Suite's policy, a lot of those things you just said, I can change by logging into G Suite. You might not be able to change those on the endpoint because it's managed someplace else. So how often are you running into like, oh, this is an Intune setting, I can't manage it here, or these browser things, you're going to run into some of these SaaS sort of settings as well?
That's a funny question because this was something I learned recently working with the Google Chrome settings, is that they do actually have an order of priority levels of where it takes commands from. And it's just like group policy, right? Where you've got like local versus domain. And so same with Intune where it passes those things down. On Intune and the OS side of the house, everything comes down to the endpoint. And so anything that you can set in Intune, you can set on the endpoint, assuming that it's applied for the endpoint. And then from there, it's just a level of priority. Google's is interesting because a lot of those configurations, their priority level is actually system is overrides all. So even if you had something set in the cloud for like your Google Chrome enterprise browser, if somebody sets it locally on the system within those policies, it'll actually override what you set on the cloud. And so that's an interesting sort of nuance of like, hey, you think this is secure, you think this is applied properly. There's probably a little verification you need to do there as well because it will get overridden if you have something local.
Are the majority of your SMB customers, I mean, I know they're Windows, but are they asking for Mac? Are they asking for Linux? Are they asking for like Chromebooks? Are they asking for anything like that?
We definitely get a decent amount of requests for Mac. So I think that's something that's on our roadmap we want to look at. Ideally, with a partnership with somebody like Jamf that already does a great job with the MDM side of the house for MacBooks. Linux, I will say less so. Mostly, I think because the operating system is just configured differently and its use cases more servers and more things that aren't touched as often. And so those can be sort of consolidated and centralized a little bit more easily.
One thing I forgot to ask about, because I've talked about it on the show a number of times, is just how you guys can help for small businesses that are trying to be CMMC compliant. And when CMMC came out, I was like, boy, do we really need another standard? But I love the politics of it and the strategy of the DoD to basically say, look, if you're going to do business with the DoD, you got to at least have some basic IT hygiene. So what are you guys doing for CMMC?
Oh, that's an easy one to answer because CMMC is one of those one of those frameworks that requires a baseline. So they do require that you have a baseline configured properly for all of your assets. To be able to get a level 2 certification, I believe is the one that requires it. Beyond that, they have a lot of the same things that based off of like the NIST 800, 171, where you're looking at things like password policy, you're looking at things like protocols, all the same stuff that we talk about all the time. It's going to be the same there, but they're nice and easy because we're like, yeah, you need a baseline.
Excellent. So I've got the website up here. What sort of freemium offerings do you have for customers? How do they try? How do they evaluate? What should they do?
Mm-hmm. So if you come today to the platform and you are looking to try it out, there's a 3-week trial period that you're free to use where you can deploy, I think right now it's up to 10 workstations. You can get a free evaluation. You can run and try the hardening, see if you have any impact, anything like that. And then after the 3-week trial period, we do try to make resources available to our partners so you can continue to do evaluation scans. You can continue to check if you are in compliance or not. It won't be applying the settings for you, but it will at least provide you a basis if you were looking to do it through another platform or do it manually, to at least come in and use us as like a secondary source of truth for that. And we do always try to make sure the catalog is available for anybody to use, just because being able to tell how things are related to compliance frameworks, that's not our main focus, but we understand that that's something that is, extraordinarily useful.
So then for free, they can at least get 10 computers and audit them, but they're not going to manage them, which is pretty good. I like to put that out because there's so many cyber products out there. Everybody's got a different way to, make it easy for people to test and whatnot there. What about MSPs? Are you looking for partners who can bring SENTEON to their customer base?
Yeah, I mean, having had our stint into small businesses, most of our partners that we work with, especially closely, are MSPs, and there's a lot of value there for us because they're a basis of team of people that can give us validation really quickly. If we're pushing out a feature, there's somebody there I can message real fast to be like, hey, we just pushed this out. Let me know how it works for you. Let me know if that's helpful for you. And I think for them, we provide a lot of value because they have so many disparate environments to manage that anything that can help save them time from how overworked they are, I think is pretty helpful to them. And so managed service providers, definitely a lot of value there, sort of on both sides of the street.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to thank you very much for coming on the show. Any final words that you want to share with our listeners about either configuration management, SENTEON, or just cyber in general?
Keep doing your best out there. It's a hard fight for us being on the blue side of the house, right? We mess up once and that's kind of it for us, and they only have to succeed once. So I recognize it's a hard side of that, or it's a hard fight to have. But I appreciate everybody out there that is doing their best to be good at security. And for us over at SENTEON, we're looking to help people do that as best as possible and hopefully push out some hardened baselines.
Awesome. Well, Henry, thanks again for coming on the show. Thanks, everybody, for watching this. If you want to try SENTEON out, go ahead to their website. If you enjoyed this video, give us a like and subscribe. Once again, I'm Ron Gula from Gula Tech Adventures. I hope everybody has a great week. Thanks for watching.